That'd be great. People are like, I'm just. Let me find, I know. I gotta go find my guy I got a guy, but
You have a guy.
right now.
For right now, we'll do this. Okay.
Do we have a lot in there, Mike? Yeah, so he doesn't have to hold this the whole time? Hi, come on in. You don't know where Jake puts it. But wait a minute. Sammy, can you have a, mic stand? He doesn't have to hold it. Yeah, okay. He's here to text Ernesto. Please get a mic stand in the sanctuary.
Don't know who it belongs to, but it isn't mine.
It's a nice one.
Yeah.
We're gonna start, come on in. Okay. How are you? Good. Looks really for Howie, but okay. Yeah, guys, first 3 rows. Go.
First 3 rows. You get an extra discount if you come up, you know.
1, 2, 3. Closer.
That's right.
I know. Come on, come close. Hi. Alice, you made it.
I did. I didn't know if I'd be up to it, but I am.
So if we can sit in the first 3 rows.
Is Jim Kenny next week?
He's virtual,
Okay,
and he'll be taken.
okay, yeah, that's good, because yeah, I gotta miss that one.
Thank you, Ernesto. Can everyone sit in the first 3 rows? 1, 2, 3. Come closer. Don't make me call you out by name. Okay. It's good to see everyone. We're going to use mics, even though it's a smaller crowd. First 3 rows, first 3 rows. I got a lot of, come on, come close. We're going to be studying together. Okay. I guess that's 3 if you count it as 6. Okay. So, welcome everyone. I do want to welcome Alice. Can you wave your hand? New member. So please say hello to her. So please say hello to her. Jerry, come on in after you finish eating. After you finish eating. Okay, so I'm super excited today because Rabbi Josh Feigelson, I'm going to read you his resume and then read you, and then tell you what I want to say. He was appointed executive director of Institute for Jewish Spirituality in January 2020, right before the pandemic, became president in April 22, right after the pandemic. He received ordination from Yeshivat Chovavei Torah Rabbinical School in 2005, and he served as 6 years as the Hillel Rabbi at Northwestern University, where he also earned a PhD in religious studies. In 2011, Rabbi helped found and served as executive director of Ask Big Questions, which is just, they're fabulous, an initiative of Hillel International, which won the inaugural Lippman Canfor Prize for Applied Jewish Wisdom. He has also been a consultant and senior fellow at the ICE Center for Israel Education. Most recently, he served as the Dean of Students at the University of Chicago Divinity School. Yeah, I know, wow, he's very impressive. He is a Wexner Graduate Fellow and was the founding co-chair of the Wexner Fellowship Alumni Committee. He's the author of Eternal Questions. That's the book that you'll be able to buy today. Reflections, Conversations, and Jewish Mindfulness Practices for Weekly Torah Portion. Rabbi lives with his wife, Natalie, and their 3 sons in Skokie. I also do some consulting for the ICE Center, and I've known Rabbi Feigelson all that time. He has a lovely family. He has a great presence on Facebook, and he's just really a delightful person. And, you know, this is, for me, this is like the next generation, and I feel we're in really good hands with Rabbi Feigelson to take us and to take all of our kids. Rabbi Feigelson.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
It's being, I'll think of the word.
Streamed.
Streaming, thank you. It's being streamed, and it'll take me a hot minute to get the video of it, but I think I'll be able to pull that out. So I know that it's on, and I'm going to go check and make sure, but yes, it's streamed.
Okay. Great. Thanks so much, Vanessa. Thank you, everybody, for your warm welcome. Nice to be here with you on a Sunday morning. Vanessa, just time check. We're aiming to, what's our destination?
Right, so our destination is like 11.
Great.
And we could go to 11:15, but at 11:30 the kids come back in.
Great.
So we're blessed to have a large school, and we're so happy that they need this room.
Fantastic. Okay. Just wanted to just verify. All right. So great to be with you. And we're going to, you know what, why don't we, sorry, before you just head off, let's just pass these out. We're just going to pass these out, I think. Also, here. There you go. That's great. Thank you. Oh.
I just, in case I have to make one.
There we go.
Maybe share.
Yeah, if you want to double up. So this is a chapter from the book, and we'll use this in a couple of minutes, but I'll give a little background and introduction, and then we'll have a chance to do a little bit of study together. So as Vanessa said, my background, my current job that I've been at for now just about 4 years is I'm the president and CEO of the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, which I've also got some information up here about. And I'll tell you a little bit about that work because that's actually, and my own journey in writing this book, because they're all part of the same story. So the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, abbreviated IJS, is an organization that was founded in 1999. And it was founded really in large measure in response to the phenomenon of boo Jews. Does everyone know that term? Right? So Jews who found much more meaning in Buddhism than they might have found in Judaism, right? And you probably have friends who are this way. So beginning in the late 60s and 70s and through the 80s and 90s, tens of thousands of Jews, most of whom were coming from Reform, Reconstructionist, conservative backgrounds in suburban synagogues, oftentimes, and they went to college and they found insight meditation centers or Zen meditation or yoga or various other forms of Asian spiritual practices, and they said, wow, this is really cool. And so it turns out, if you fast forward by the end of the 1990s, and including till today, when you look at who some of the major teachers of mindfulness and Buddhism in America are, they have last names like Borstein and Goldstein and Salzburg and all Jews. And that's great. That's wonderful that they found that and that works for them. But the founders of our organization, who included a couple of rabbis, Rabbi Rachel Cowan of blessed memory and Rabbi Nancy Flam, they were sort of looking at this and saying, well, what is that telling us? That's telling us something. If tens of thousands of Jews are leaving Jewish life to find something, to find more meaning in a different tradition, what do we need to learn from that tradition? And this was especially true in the 1990s. The 1990s was sort of the height of the continuity crisis, gave rise to Birthright, gave rise to PJ Library, gave rise to lots of things where, because for the first time in the 1990 National Jewish Population Survey, you had 52% of marriages were taking place between Jews and people who are Jewish and people who weren't Jewish. And this, for a lot of people at the time, provoked an outcry. Oh, wow, this is the first time we've ever had a majority that's the case. What's that going to mean? And so it prompted a lot of, a lot of efforts to double down on Jewish identity. So meanwhile, our founders were looking at this and saying, well, here's a whole lot of Jews who are finding something else, someplace else that they found to be meaningful. One of the solutions that we've got to offer is providing a meaningful Judaism. And so what can we learn from that? And so what came about was the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, which over the last 25 years we have 550 or so rabbis and cantors who have been through an 18-month program that is designed over 4 silent retreats, if you can imagine. A group of 40 rabbis and cantors getting together for 5 days and being silent, with the exception of when they're davening. There was an educators cohort that I'm looking to bring back, but anyway, over the course of that, many of those clergy have gone on, to serve or not have gone on. They come to us already in positions of leadership, and you can ask Rick Jacobs, the head of the Union for Reform Judaism, or Rabbi Angela Buchdahl, or Rabbi David Stern, or lots of other prominent clergy in the Reform movement and elsewhere, and you can ask all 3 of those people that I just named, and you can ask them, just mention the letters IJS to them, and they will all say it is the most important thing that they ever did in their rabbinic career. And I'm very privileged to hear from a lot of people about, IJS saved my career, saved my marriage, saved my life. And I will say, I spent the first 14 years of my career in higher education. I can't recall a single time anyone ever came up to me and said, wow, the university really saved my anything, right? So if anything, university, especially in graduate education, can be very corrosive. So the work we do at the Institute for Jewish Spirituality is really taking the lessons that I think have been learned for a lot of people through exposure to mindfulness meditation that I heard Ashley, who is involved in teaching for us now, was just using with with the kids here just before you all came in, doing a breathing exercise I noticed at the very end of Havdalah. But taking those lessons and those practices and saying, number one, we have a lot of these things that are actually, the same teachings are present and latent within Judaism. And what many of us have lost is the ability to see them because of the ways, especially Western contemporary university-educated Judaism has happened. We've obscured a lot of the traditions and a lot of the practices that might help us experience Judaism from like the ears down, right? That Judaism isn't just a cerebral, intellectual experience, but in fact is a fully embodied experience that is meant to ultimately be engaging our full lives and our full selves. So what we do, and since the pandemic, really, we've been now not just teaching rabbis and cantors, but 24,000 people on our email list and 250 plus every day who come to a daily online sit that we have. You can come 11:30 a.m. Central every day, Monday through Friday, half an hour. You can do Jewish meditation with us. You can do that on demand on YouTube. We have podcasts. We have all sorts of stuff. There are brochures here. You can take them later. We have online courses. We run retreats, etc. And really what it's about is recovering Jewish life as Jewish practice as a practice, as I said, not just an intellectual exercise, not just that, boy, that was interesting, or boy, that was meaningful, but in a cerebral way, but really being able to really feel and experience God, divinity, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, whatever you want to call it, we can feel it, we can sense it, it can be here and present, and can lead us, that our encounter with Judaism, our encounter with Torah, can lead us to not just a more meaningful life, but a richer, more present, more mindful life. One of the ways that we do that then, I'll get to one of the ways we do it. Let me tell you about me for a second, because my destination here is a little unexpected. When I was hired, I got a call from a friend of mine who's a very prominent Jew, a big teacher named Jay Michelson. He's teaching a course for us right now. Jay and I have known each other since college for 30 years. And Jay said, I got to tell you, when I saw that you got this job, my first thought was like, Feigelson? And then he said, and then it made sense. Because I did not come to this work having gone through any kind of Buddhist practice. I didn't spend time doing yoga. I had never really developed a meditation practice before. But I had friends who had been doing that. And for years, they had been nudging me, you should come do IJS's program. And finally, about 5 years ago, 4 years ago, after my father had passed away, and I was sort of approaching a professional, my early midlife crisis. I am 47, despite what you may think. I know I look like a college freshman sometimes. But anyway, my oldest son is a sophomore in college at U of I. So I had, I was approaching that point in my life, and I was like, okay, I think now's the time. So I had signed up to do the program for rabbis. And I had started, doing discovering a meditation practice, developing that. I found my first minute of meditation to be excruciating. Like I couldn't make it through a minute of being quiet. And so I can laugh at that now, but it's very for real. And then this job came open, and a friend of mine who I trust, a professional colleague who I trust, implicitly, the kind of person, like if she told me, jump off a high building, I'd say, great, tell me where and when. So she said, you should really look at this job. This would be a great position for you. So I looked, and one thing led to another, and I got the job January of 2020, as Vanessa said, and then the world turned upside down. Turns out we're a counter-cyclical business. When things are bad in the world, it's really good for the mindfulness meditation business. So COVID was amazing for us. It was horrible for the world. It was great for us, and we grew a lot. And we're finding now also with what's happening in Israel, people, just really coming to, they're looking for what we have to offer, which are practices that can help, ground us, help us experience some kind of calm and centeredness, help us practice more mindful speech and mindful listening, which I find is extremely important in the age of social media. So one of the things that we've done for many years is we also produce Torah study tools. Because so we teach mindfulness meditation, we teach Jewish yoga, we teach chant, we teach prayer as a contemplative practice. Imagine that, prayer, tefillah, as like a practice that's meant to do something more than be interesting, and Torah study as a contemplative practice, and so one of the ways that we do that is for the last 20 or so years, we have produced every year an original translation of a Hasidic text, and I'll talk about Hasidism for a second, but we produce an original translation with then practice, ideas, and suggestions. We do actually 2 levels, one for an advanced group, like for the rabbis, and anybody else who wants to take that one, and then one for more of a general audience. When I came on, we didn't have anyone lined up to do the following year's text study, and so I volunteered. I said, why don't I do this for this year? It'll give me a way to get to know our audience, and little did I know, that was going to be like 6 or 7 hours of work every week when I signed up. It's a project. But after a couple of essays, I realized, but at the end of this project, you get a book out of it, because now you have 50 essays on the weekly Torah portion. And so that became the book that I have, and we're going to look at the one that's for this week. It also means that when you do scholar in residence gigs, you always have something to teach, which is fabulous. So, this book that I wrote is called Eternal Questions, reflections, conversations, and Jewish mindfulness practices for the weekly Torah portion. And the opening, there's an introduction that's entitled, What Makes This Torah Portion Book Different from All Other Torah Portion Books, because there are many Torah Portion books out there. And what's different about it are a few things. First of all, I wrote it. That makes it different. But second, because it's the only one I've written. But second is, importantly, so the thrust of what I'm trying to do is help us, again, not just experience the Torah as an interesting text, but actually to experience it as really helping us transform our lives, right? That I don't want us, I feel like, it's 2023. It is not enough for us to come away from our encounter with Torah saying, wow, that was interesting. I want to come away from my encounter with Torah anyway by saying, wow, this really transformed me. It should be transformative. This should change me. It should be different. And so the way that I've tried to do that, number one, is the title. The title comes from the title's internal questions. Vanessa mentioned that I had done work for a long time on an initiative called Ask Big Questions, which came about originally at Northwestern. And the idea is, I think that often we don't think about the kinds of questions we ask. And the ways we ask our questions make a huge difference to the kind of encounter and the kind of thinking that we do, the kind of conversations that we have. So I discovered this at Northwestern when I was a Hillel rabbi in the summer before the high holidays, and I was walking around the campus, and I was looking, if you know the spot at Sheridan Road and Chicago Avenue where they come together and there's the archway there, right? So inside the arch, there's a bunch of trees. And it's where the theater groups and the fraternities, right, they hang painted sheets announcing their upcoming events. And so you'll have like Thursday night, Midsummer Night's Dream. Friday night, big party at Sigma Chi. So I figured we got to announce the high holidays. We'll put a banner, or put a sheet that says, Yom Kippur, Saturday, repent. And funny thing happened on the way to Yom Kippur. We could probably not just make a painted sheet. We could get a nice banner at Kinko's. And what if we didn't just make an announcement? We asked a question. So the question we put on the banner was, what will you do better this year? Basic question of the high holidays. And we put little ideas of things you could do better. Donate blood, drink fair trade coffee, call your parents, vote, right? And at the end of Yom Kippur services in Pickstaker Hall, I'm standing at the door, and people are coming out, and I'm saying hello, and all these students are coming up to me saying, Rabbi Josh, we saw your banner, right, for Hillel on the quad. My friend and I, we were walking along. We wound up in this conversation about we were going to do better this year. It was a great conversation. You should make more banners. So we started making more banners, at Thanksgiving, what are you thankful for? At Parents' Weekend, who's in your family? During sorority and fraternity rush, who's in your community, that sort of thing. At Pesach, how are we free, right? And we started having salons in the campus Starbucks. We started having, with rock star professors and stuff. And it turned into a thing, and one thing led to another, and I was in the right place at the right time, and somebody with a lot of money came up to me and said, I have a lot of money. I'd like to give it to you to make this big. So that led to the next 6 years, and we made it a national initiative, and it was great. Where it ties into this book is we discovered along the way what made those banners work. Like, when did they work? Was that the kinds of questions that we asked were questions that had to resonate with people's personal experience and lead them into a larger sort of reflection about life. Rabbis know these as good sermon questions, good hooks. But we decided there was a technical definition. They were questions that matter to everybody and that everybody can answer. And they're to be distinguished between questions that matter to everybody but only some people can answer. So if I ask you the question, what is the definition or what's the meaning of responsibility? That, I think, is a question that matters to everybody. But the more you consider yourself a linguist or a philosopher or somebody who can answer that question, you'll participate in that conversation. The less you do, the more you'll shrink from that. It's a definitional question. We're going to get into arguments about responsibility, the definition of responsibility. But if we tweak that question, who are you responsible for? Right? Or who are we responsible for? all of a sudden, that turns into a very different conversation. That turns into, I'm telling stories. I'm responsible for my children. I'm responsible for care, for care for my mother. I'm responsible for employees. I'm responsible for myself, right? I'm responsible for a lot of different things. And we would start to have conversations about that. And that leads us in a different direction. It leads us more into reflection and storytelling than into arguments and sort of competing truth claims. And so that became the touchstone for big questions. It's the same idea for eternal questions, and we thought eternal sounded a little more oomphy for the title of a book than big questions. So eternal questions and big questions are really the same thing, but they also are questions that I think are the animating questions that we come back to over and over and over again in our study of Torah, and that all spiritual traditions, all religious traditions, are really responses to a similar set of questions. If you have a body and you've been on the planet for more than 10 minutes, you have a response. You have a story to tell about this kind of a question. So every question in this book is titled using a big question. So you can see here for this week's Torah portion is, how do we tell our stories? All of us have stories, and all of us have ways that we tell them. So that's the first thing that makes it different. The second thing that makes it different is that this book is that every essay is anchored in a Hasidic text. So the Hasidic movement, just as a little refresher on Jewish history here, Hasidism was founded in the 18th century in Eastern Europe. Ukraine, Russia, spread to Poland, Lithuania, the Pale of Settlement area, right? And before World War II, before the Shoah, was far and away the largest group, really the most influential Jewish denomination, if we want to call it. Well, it wasn't that, but it was a movement, and it was a movement started by a rabbi named Israel Baal Shem Tov, right? The Besht, the Baal Shem Tov, founder of Hasidism, who then had students and students and students and students, and it just grew. And the idea of Hasidism was to tap into personal experience of divinity in the world, to get us back to be a corrective for what they saw as an over-intellectualization of Judaism, right? Not just focus on Talmud study, even though Talmud study is very important, right? Not just focus on the performance of mitzvot, even though that's very important, but are those things actually helping you experience the presence of the divine in your body, in your life, in the world, and making that accessible to everybody? It was a highly democratic movement in its ethos. And I like to point out to people, like the Baal Shem Tov in the mid-18th century is a contemporary of George Washington, right? Like, think of it that way. They're actually responding to similar questions. In a certain way, it's the most democratic. It's one of the most democratic Jewish movements I know of, but was largely wiped out in the Shoah, right? Today, what we have left is we have Lubavitch, right? Chabad. You've got Satmar, right? In America. You have in Israel, you have Breslov Hasidus, right? Breslov Hasidim, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, they follow his teachings. And then you have small communities that are, that somehow manage to survive. But it's not nearly what it was before the war. And what got lost in a lot of that, right, especially in American Jewish life, was some of the same stuff that led those folks to look for Buddhist practice, I think, and that's what a lot of our founding teachers thought, is Hasidism was responding to a similar set of questions about, making this not just a cerebral exercise or an intellectual exercise, but making it a felt in my body experience. So we use Hasidic texts. We think those are really important texts that can be very helpful to us, to all of us, and should be available to all of us. So we'll look at a short one in a second. So that's a second piece. A third piece is that I was writing this, by nature, I'm a person who likes to draw connections between different types of literature, different types of, different fields. I want to see the relationships or find correspondences of relationships between whatever I'm reading and other things, right? And so I made a special effort in this to put non-Jewish or other types of texts into conversation with those Hasidic texts that are in the center. And I was writing this in 2020, 2021. A lot of us had, especially a heightened awareness at that time coming out of that summer of wanting to recover or be in dialogue with, I should say, African American writers or Native American writers, et cetera. So there's a lot of, there's diversity that's represented in the text that I try to, thank you very much. There's diversity that's represented in the additional text. And then the last thing is that actually if you look to the end of the chapter I gave you, each one of the essays here also has, at the end of it, questions that are designed for reflection or that you could have in conversation with a study partner if you were reading this together, that you could have in conversation. So designed to bring it into your life, right, which I think is really important. Again, not just giving you an essay and saying, well, that was interesting, but like really helping us have a conversation about it and bring it home. And then finally, that there are some ideas for practicing with it. Right? So either meditation practice or other kinds of mindfulness practice. You don't have to be a meditator necessarily, but other types of mindfulness practices to bring this again into our lives so it can be transformative. So that's the background of the book. Why don't we spend a little time with a text, and then we'll have a little chavruta also, we'll have a little study in pairs, and then we'll have time for sharing out and some questions and conversation. So the Torah portion for this coming week, one second, let me just, before I get there. So the Torah portion for this coming week is Chaye Sarah. So if you were in shul yesterday, you might, or Friday, you might have heard, right? We just finished the story of Abraham, most of the story of Abraham. This is the final parsha. This is the final. There's 3 Torah portions dedicated to the life of Abraham. This is the 3rd one. So we just did the binding of Isaac's story, right? This parsha opens, this Torah portion opens with the death of Sarah, his wife. Abraham buys a burial plot for her, right, to bury her. And then the rest of the Torah portion is devoted to him sending away his servant, who's unnamed, but the rabbis understand his name was Eliezer. He sends Eliezer off to Mesopotamia, back to his homeland, to find a wife for Isaac, his son. Right? So Abraham sends Eliezer to go find a wife for Isaac. And he finds Rebekah and brings her back, and they get married and live not so happily ever after. Right? and that's the rest of it, but that'll be for the following week. Okay. So what's interesting, one of the interesting features of this Torah portion is that section of Eliezer, the servant, finding a wife for Isaac is long, and it involves both a narration of the event, of what happened, so the 3rd-person narrator, right, of the Torah narrating what happens to Eliezer, that Rebekah comes and they're at the well. It's one of those well scenes, right? At the well, and he finds her, and but what's interesting is that when Eliezer meets Rebekah's family, he then retells the whole story from his point of view. So the Torah repeats this, right? It's repeated. And the Torah, the assumption that the rabbis of the Talmud and the Midrash have when they read the Torah is the Torah doesn't waste any words. It's an economical document. So if you have repetition, that's the first question you ask is, why is this repetition here? Right? And there's not a great explanation for why this repetition is here, honestly. I'll say. I haven't come across a great understanding of like why is this repetition here? So that was the question that was animating me as I was approaching this. And so if you look at if you look at the second page here, which is labeled page 24, it says who's the audience on top. So I guess I'll read myself here for a second. Okay. Not all changes in our stories are due simply to forgetfulness on our part. Often we consciously or subconsciously alter our stories because of who we're talking to. When someone asks me for the story of my career, I find that I tell that story in a pretty similar way, even verbatim duplication, right? And think in your own life. If somebody asks you, so tell me about your work life, or tell me about your, you probably duplicate that. You have a rehearsed version of that. Or when I tell the story of how my wife and I met, or the birth of our children, or many others. I imagine you too have these kinds of stories, ones that are well rehearsed and polished from repetition. But frequently I observe that these stories are adjusted ever so slightly, a different word here, a little embellishment of a detail there, leaving out this tiny piece, and so on. I imagine we do this because of our perception of the person we're talking to and the subtle ways we intuit they might need to hear the story. Or perhaps, if we're being really honest, we change our narration based on how we want to be perceived by the listener as we tell the story. So the Hasidic text that I have here is pretty brief. It's from a late 19th century teacher, influential, named Rabbi Yehuda Leib Alter of Ger, the Ger Hasidim, and a book of his called the Svat Emet, the language of truth. And this is actually a teaching from the year 1875 that he made about Passover. So he says, he quotes, first of all, the part in the Haggadah that says, the more we tell the story of the Exodus, the more praiseworthy that is. Okay, hopefully that sounds a little familiar. So he says, the more one tells the story, the more praiseworthy one is. For the story of the Exodus from Egypt brings conscious awareness, da'at. So already he's saying the story of the Exodus. What is the story of the Exodus? One of the things you have to realize is one of the things that many Hasidic teachers do is they spiritualize the historical events. Which is not to say they didn't happen, but they're saying the significance of them is not necessarily in the historical aspect, but in the spiritual aspect. So the Exodus from Egypt, what is Egypt in Hebrew? Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is also Metzarim. It's the narrow place. It's constricted, right? Min ha-metzar karati ya. I called to you from the narrow place. Mitzrayim is the place of constrictions. So if you spiritualize that and you say, every year I'm leaving my narrow place, or every day, we have to actually remember, the commandment is to remember the Exodus from Egypt every day. If you're leaving the narrow place, if you're leaving the place of constriction all the time, you're becoming free all the time. We always have a choice, according to Hasidic teachings, right? In a spiritual sense, we're always leaving Mitzrayim. It didn't just happen then. It's always happening, right? Because we're always sensing a feeling of, we might be sensing a feeling of constriction, of narrowness. How do we respond to that with a sense of breadth, of openness, of expansiveness, right? Anybody who's following the news these days or spends any time on, don't go on Facebook, right? You're probably feeling that feeling of constriction, right? And how do we respond to that with some sense of expansiveness? That is Yetziat Mitzrayim. That's actually leaving Egypt. So not only in a historical sense, but in a meaningful, right now, spiritual sense. So back to the Svat Emet, he says. For the story of the Exodus from Egypt brings conscious awareness. Conscious awareness is a mindfulness term. I'm using that to translate the notion of da'at, which is often intelligence, but we'll call it conscious awareness. As it is written, that you will tell the story in the ears of your children and your children's children, the wonders I performed in Egypt and the signs I put in their midst, and you will be consciously aware that I am Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, I am God. So he's picking up here on the commandment that is in the story of the Exodus to know, what is the point of the Exodus according to this, is to know that Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, Hashem, the ineffable, the unnameable God, that we're supposed to know God. That's actually what the Exodus is about. Having that awareness is the key. Again, not just in an intellectual way, okay, I believe it, whatever, but actually having an awareness of it. What does it mean to really feel that, to experience that, right? That God is actually present in our lives and here. So, since the Exodus is told of in the Torah, and the Torah is given to the people of Israel, we are able to arouse the power of redemption. For the Exodus from constriction happens by means of telling the story. How do we leave? Right? Why do we tell the story of the Exodus every year? It's through telling that we actually leave the constriction. We actually leave Egypt by telling the story. That's what he's saying. This is the power of the mouth. By means of bringing forth words out of our mouths, we uncover hidden meanings and arrive at revelation. Okay, you with me? So, important rule when you're reading Hasidic literature that I like to tell people is read it more like poetry than prose. Okay? So, the way you would approach poetry, let it speak to you that way. You'll get more out of it. So, just to repeat this last line, this is the power of the mouth. By means of bringing forth words out of our mouths, we uncover hidden meanings and arrive at revelation. He's making a wordplay here that appears in the Hebrew. Pesach, Passover, becomes peh, mouth, sach, speak. Okay? So the holiday of Pesach is actually the mouth speaking. It's telling the story. So through the act of telling the story, that's actually how. So if we go down for a second, well, no, I'll give my little drush on this, and then we'll just see what Estelle Frankel has to say, and then we'll have a time for a little bit of conversation. So I'm going to keep reading myself here. For the Sfat Emet, those subtle changes in how we narrate stories, whether the story of the Exodus, can we possibly say there's only one story, or the stories of our own continuous liberation from various forms of constriction, our own personal Mitzrayims, are the very vehicle by which the liberation happens. And not only liberation, but revelation, a deeper awareness of the truth of our existence. This truth can be obscured when we focus only on the reality of our freedom and don't then move to the simultaneous reality of our lives as vessels for the divine in the world. The fact of our own liberation must become a revelation of divinity in the world, for ourselves and for others. The more we tell the story, the deeper we can go in our awareness of the fact that the story is just a story, and the more we can come to appreciate the many ways we can narrate our lives. Of course, that's only when we pay attention. If we mindlessly narrate our stories, whether at the Seder or on the phone, then that enhanced awareness remains beyond our comprehension. Okay? I want to just bring in one other thinker here, who's Estelle Frankel. Estelle Frankel is a psychotherapist who does narrative therapy. But she does it through, part of her work, she actually is able to use these sort of Hasidic teachings in her own clinical practice. And so she actually, she says, this is at the bottom of the page, the quote here. She says, all verbal therapies are in effect narrative therapies, focused on altering the problematic stories people tell themselves. Psychotherapy offers the patient a chance to edit or rewrite his story by framing it within a larger context or by making room for alternative storylines. And by telling his story to a sympathetic listener, namely the therapist, the patient can begin to discover a new inner voice, that of a sympathetic narrator. This simple change in voice transforms the story. Events from the past are not just relived, but recast in a new light. The past is recontextualized by the compassionate awareness and insight the therapist and patient bring to it in the present moment. So that may sound somewhat familiar if you've ever been in psychotherapy, or just in when you've been able to examine one of the stories or hear somebody else tell a story from a different perspective, right? Be able to say, you know, this happened actually, there's another way to tell this story, right? There's another way to tell this story. An example, on the level of the Jewish people, since I think it's on our minds right now, is, one way to tell the story of the Shoah is we lost 6 million of Jews, and Jewry was nearly wiped out, and it was a tremendous calamity. Another way to tell that story is it was also, without the Shoah, the state of Israel may not have come into being quite as quickly as it did, right? Not to say that they were directly linked, but there's no question that it played a role, right? And so who knows how these things are linked? Now, is that a price worth paying? I'm not going to get into that. And theologically, there's a Pandora's box that you're opening up there, so I'm not going there. But I'm just saying there are ways that we, in our own lives on much more mundane levels, right, we tell stories, in very different ways. And things that we think may have been curses turn out to be blessings, and things we think were blessings may not turn out to be blessings after all, right? So we can reframe our understanding. That's not rocket science. But it's a very powerful insight, and one that I think we hear evocatively here in the Sfat Emet. So just by way of conclusion here, my own writing here, the final paragraph, Jewish mindfulness practice can be indispensable for bringing about this kind of change, and indeed for becoming something like a compassionate listener to ourselves. Right? Remember, she was talking about just the fact of having someone listen to our stories can be transformative, right, in therapy. That there's someone to listen to. There's someone will listen to my story compassionately, without judgment. We can also do that for ourselves. There's a way we can tell our stories to ourselves and be compassionate towards ourselves. And so mindfulness practice can actually be very helpful for that. When we bring a story to consciousness during practice and allow ourselves to investigate it non-judgmentally, to recognize that it is but one way of understanding our experience, we enable ourselves to go to the balcony and look down on the story from various angles. In so doing, we engage in the work that both Frankel and the Sfat Emet describe of liberating ourselves from the negative hold our stories can have on us. We can start to see other ways of understanding the stories of our lives and those of the others with whom we share our existence, arriving at the deeper da'at, or mindful awareness, to which the Sfat Emet refers. And we move toward an experience of revelation, a moment in which we can sense the divine moving in our lives and making possible an infinite array of stories. So, I wonder if you might, I'm just trying to think, what do I want to do here? Are you guys up for, if I led a short little sit for about 5 minutes, would you be up for that? How would that feel? Who here has experience with any kind of mindfulness meditation? A small number. Okay. I'm going to try it. Let's try it, okay? Rather than the chavruta piece. I think I'm going to do that. So, if you want to just try to sit up in your chair, okay? And you can be against the edge. You can lift your back off the back of the chair if you want. Just try to bring some, height to your posture a little bit without getting too rigid about it. Just take a good, deep breath. If you want to soften your gaze or close your eyes, again, in through the nose and out through the mouth. Maybe one more time. And just check in with your body. If there are any places that you might be feeling a little bit of constriction, or any kind of pain, to try to bring a little bit of softness or tenderness to them. Just notice being supported by the chair, by your legs and feet, that are being held up by the ground, by the earth and all the things that are here to support you. And just try to make an intention to be aware of your breathing. You're breathing in, you might just make a mental note to yourself, breathing in. You're breathing out and breathing out. You may try to notice, where does the breath begin? Does it end? Where does the air start? Where does it become breath? Just even after 90 seconds or so now, hopefully you're feeling a bit of centeredness, maybe a little calmer. Maybe dozing off, and that's okay. Let's see now if there's a story, even from the last 24 hours. Could be an interaction that you had. Could be what you ate for breakfast. Just go over that story in your mind. See what you notice about it. What happened and who was involved? Was there any particular way you felt in that story? And then see if you can set down that version of the story and see if you can tell the story from another perspective. Maybe from the perspective of somebody else who was in it. Maybe if you're thinking about the story of your breakfast, the perspective of whatever you ate. All of a sudden I was in somebody's mouth. How did that happen? Again, just notice the freedom to tell a story in a different way. There's not only one way to tell a story. Could even be the story of the breathing that we're doing right now. Does the inhalation come first and the exhalation follows? Or maybe the exhalation is what makes room for the inhalation. Rather than being confounded by the fact that we can tell a story in multiple ways, we could actually revel in the ability to tell a story in multiple ways. The Sfat Emet says this is the beginning of our freedom. Not to be locked in, not to be in the constricted place, but to be in the expansive place that allows us to tell a story in multiple versions. As we wrap up, just take 3 last cycles of breath. can open your eyes, look around. Appreciate everyone else who's here. So we're almost at 11 a.m. Why don't we, I got some time for, why don't we make some time for questions right now if you have questions? And okay, we got somebody in the back.
How do you relate what you've been talking about to the Judaism that is very specific and authoritarian in what you should do, what you should eat, what you should say in a prayer, etc.?
So, it's a great question, thank you. So I think it's really useful, I've found, in my own life, having gone to an Orthodox rabbinical school, and I keep a pretty, basically Orthodox practice, to think about halakha, Jewish law, or not as law. I think that's a bad translation. I would maybe characterize it as discipline or practice. I have a favorite essay about this that opens with, it's by a scholar named Ariel Mays, and he opens it with an image of him at age 16 doing his black belt test in karate on a like mountaintop in California or something. And he uses that to think about the same way you would approach karate, or people who are, do ice skating, or people who do any kind of physical exercise, or or if you're a scientist in the lab and there's a certain methodology, you follow, et cetera. That there are practices, right? There are disciplines. There are ways that we discipline ourselves and practices that we follow that are meant to condition us, right? And they should be conditioning us in healthy ways. And so that's what, I think Jewish, as I experience, what Jewish practice, what halakha, those rules are supposed to be. Where it goes wrong, in my view, is if that starts to become a form of constriction that is doing more to harm than to contribute to flourishing, right? Then that's probably a good indication that it's problematic, right? Something's not quite right there. So I think if it's about authoritarian, right, control, that's not contributing to freedom. That's not contributing to expansiveness. That to me would strike me as unhealthy and not a good idea. And there are many ways in which practices, when they are entered into and observed, right, with that kind of, with the kind of spirit I'm talking about, as a discipline, can be liberating, right? My Shabbat practice is extremely liberating to me. To many people, it would look constricting, right? I don't use electronics on Shabbat. I don't drive. I don't use money. And I don't write. And but what opens up for me as a result of that practice that I've been doing for 40 years, there's so much that opens up in that for me. With our kids, we have 3 boys, 20, 18, and 10. And we were very clear with all of them that our prime directive with raising them as teenagers was we don't want them to leave home resenting Shabbos. So if Shabbat became a form of constriction for them, and they wanted to go see their friends, they went to Rochelle Zell, and so, most of their friends live up here. We live in Skokie. We're like, something's got to give. And great, then, go see your friends. I remember having the conversation with my son, my oldest son, when he was 11 or 12, wanting to, actually it's 13, it's after his bar mitzvah. He said, I want to use my phone on Shabbat. I said, why? He said, well, I want to watch Netflix. I'm like, that's not a good enough reason. He said, okay, the truth is, all my friends use their phones in Shabbat, and I feel left out, and it's having a negative effect on my mental health. I'm like, that's a good reason. You should have led with that, right? And I said, okay, go ahead, like fine, but he's aware of the choices he's making, and that's okay. So I'm just using that as an illustration of like, I think there's criteria that we need to evaluate it by, and certainly if something is authoritarian and contributing to that constriction that we just were talking about overcoming, then it's not doing the right thing. That's what I would say. Another question next door.
Just kind of a follow-up to what you were saying and how I thought about it is during Passover, I am strictly kosher for Passover, but that's the only time of the year. And the reason is that it increases my mindfulness of the fact that I am a Jew, okay, and my closeness to God. But it's a choice, and you said the word choice. I said, and I think that's key, okay, that I would never expect other people to do what I do, okay? But I gain a lot from the experience.
Yeah, I think it's really important, and I think, one of the things that Hasidic teaching teaches, it comes from Kabbalah actually, is we translate mitzvah frequently as commandment. There's a book called Mitzvah Means Commandment from about 30 years ago, I think. And that's true. In Aramaic, the word mitzvah is translated as savta, and savta actually means connection. And so, which is very different, right? Commandment is authoritative. The authority is coming from something outside that's commanding me to do something. Connection is like it's an invitation, which is mindfulness language. The invitation is to, right? You get that in yoga class too. Which is important because, as you're saying, it's like, voluntarily stepping in. Now, the other side of that, right? I'm speaking in a Reformed synagogue. So, in a Reformed synagogue, right? Informed choice. Great. So the choice is important, but the informed part is also really key, right? And so you have, there's a responsibility that comes with that choice of then saying, well, am I mindfully choosing, or am I not mindfully? Like, am I learning enough to be able to make that choice? So I think that's also really important. Okay.
We do have to move out of here.
Great.
I have a couple of announcements. First, I tell a lot of stories up at camp, and now I'm going to have more mindfulness when I tell the story. And my sister has told me, you tell these stories and it stays in your memory. And that would be Yetziat Mitzrayim, when we left Egypt. We want that to stay in our memory. We were so glad to have you. You live in the area. Excuse me. And I should say you're here through the Jewish Book Council. We have a lot of books. You can take a look at them on your way out. And but we're going to have you back because what a great session. I even calmed down there for a hot minute with the meditation, which is very unlike me. So this is what's going to happen. We have the books, and Rabbi Josh was we have 20 more coming. There's books here. If you want to buy them, these are through Rabbi Josh, and there's a QR code, and I can help you do that. Also, Jay Futterman. Jay, what are you going to be doing right after this?
Well, I'll be hanging out in the lounge out there. Here at Macomb, we have started a community solar program, and we're getting all of our electricity from a solar farm in Northwest Illinois, and I'm going to talk about that and how all of you at home can take advantage of that, support Macomb in the process, save emissions for the planet, and save money as well.
we're going to take them out there, but as long as I have everybody here, I do have a few announcements. It's not the Locks Box. Okay, this afternoon in Fountain Square in Evanston, there is a rally, Bring the Hostages Home. So 2 o'clock, I don't know if Rabbi Serrata is speaking at it, but he might be. He was invited to speak at it. So, and they've been rallying, these are Israelis and Israeli Americans and Americans, so it should be an interesting rally. Tomorrow night, we begin our first cohort of adult B'nai Mitzvah. If you're interested, see me. Tuesday night, if you're interested in going to Poland, April 7th through the 17th, another meeting, see me. And just watch your Macomb at home because we have a lot of the clergy classes have started back up, and we'll be discussing the movie You're So Not Invited to My Bat Mitzvah on Wednesday. It was a cute movie, I thought, and it'd be interesting to hear what everybody has to say about that. Thank you, Rabbi Josh.